Right. Oh, what are you doing now, Ludo? You're trying to balance them. Well, it's never gonna work. Alright, if you say so, we're just gonna have to go find an expert in balancing then. Luckily, I think I know just the guy. We're gonna go find someone called Mortdog. He's the game director of Teamfight Tactics, an auto chess battler offshoot of League of Legends. Now, why you need to pay extra special attention here, Ludo, is because TFT might be the most difficult balancing challenge I have ever seen. Well, it's because in a game like League, if there's an egregiously unbalanced champion, there is only really one chance for that champ to be played. Only one person can play them, and it could even get banned. Because of this, it's difficult to abuse these imbalances. But in TFT, all champions and items are available all at once, creating this whirlwind of possibilities for players to abuse these imbalances, so the game has to be super tight. So let's find out how they balance this nightmare so consistently and see what we can learn. Ah, here he is. Alright, Mortdog. Say hello then, Ludo. Oh, she's sulking because I think she thought you were an actual dog. She'll get over it. So, Mort, how do you manage to keep on top of the chaotic environment that is TFT's balance?
It's fascinating because when the game first came out, there was the question of like, how hard is this going to be to balance? And, you compare it to like, I don't know, like a card game like Hearthstone, for example. And, if you want to buff or nerf a card in Hearthstone, there's really only a few levers, right? Whereas TFT has like thousands of levers, right? You've got health, armor, MR, animation speed, things like that. And so you're like, man, you've got all these levers that getting the right balance should be relatively easy. But the reality is what we found is that any particular level can have a massive impact. We've seen lowering the animation speed of an animation 0.25 seconds make a champion go from kind of bad to insanely overpowered, And so like any particular level now being so sensitive, what we've learned over time is that, yeah, TFT is very difficult to balance because everything's so interconnected.
Yeah, so for example, if something is incredibly weak or overpowered, regardless of the counters, it can have this domino effect on how the rest of the game plays because of this interconnectedness.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. What's interesting is it actually is harmful both ways, though. That's the unique thing, right? Like, again, compare it to a card game where if a particular card is overpowered, yeah, like you said, there's counters or there's other things you can do. But in a card game, if a card is weak, for example, okay, you just don't play it in your deck, no problem. But in TFT, if a champion is weak or something like that, anything connected to it, right? Like all of a sudden the trait that champion has is also weaker because that champion exists and they have to play it, which then connects to all those other champions. Now they're weaker, which is absolutely a problem. And so that interconnectedness can get really tricky.
A mental problem, but still a manageable one because you get access to so much data to apply these changes if needed. But something that I think is super interesting is the player's perception of balance because of this data. Yeah, exactly. Our mutual friend Riot Feral Pony told me a super unique story the other day. Storytime leads to settle down. Back in the ancient times, the champion Vladimir was super overpowered, absolutely dominating in the meta, so they planned some small balance changes to bring him back down to a reasonable level. And once this patch went live, the Vladimir mains were seething endlessly that they had just nerfed their precious Vladipoos, making them practically unplayable. But here's the twist. Due to a mistake, they never actually pushed this Vladimir nerf to the live servers, so this change the Vladimir mains experienced was entirely placebo based on what they have read in the patch notes. The Vlad players were playing scared because of their perceived nerfs, and the players going up against them were playing aggressively for the same exact reasons. Perception is reality, Ludo, and I find that absolutely fascinating. But even though TFT is an auto-battler, does this kind of perception play a part in perceived balance as well?
Well, right, and something I taught the team early on is that the reality of data is that it only tells you what is, not what can be. So like you said, perception is sort of reality, right? And especially with a game like Teamfight Tactics, if it's not solved, people don't understand how to use it. In set 5, we had a champion, Vayne, who was a 1-cost. And, the set had just come out. It'd been about a week. And in all of the data, all the public sites, people had seen it. She's bad. She's like the worst 1-cost. Nobody wants to play her. And so even internally, we were sort of like, okay, we don't think she's that bad, but, it looks pretty bad. So let's give her a small buff, just a real small one. Thankfully, before the patch shipped, though, but we'd already locked it in, we get a message from some of our China players. They're like, yo, I think we found a really big build. To the point where by Monday, all of a sudden she was not only the best champion, but possibly one of the most broken ones we've ever released. And again, that was in the span of 3 days.
Yeah, I guess that's the trouble with solely relying on data from a player or developer perspective, that there could be a lot more underneath that you're not seeing.
One of the interesting things about balance is that generally your players will perceive it to be very binary. It's either strong or it's weak, right? And so it has been nerfed or it has been buffed. People don't really see the nuance, the in-betweens, the small fractions that can make massive differences, right? And you look across various games and you can see tons of instances where the tiniest change into like how many frames of downtime in a fighting game or, animation speeds can just really make or break characters and allow those windows of weakness to help that balance state.
So, because of this perception, low-rank players tend to have a completely different perspective on what is broken in comparison to, say, pro players. So when you set out to balance TFT, do you tend to do that from a casual or a pro player perspective?
So this is an interesting question because I think you look at a lot of competitive games like, say, League of Legends, and there are clearly different balance parameters for different levels of play, right? Something like, Master Yi can be very powerful in low elo, but not very good at high elo. And a lot of that is, the stuff you'd expect, right? The skill level, the APM of the player, things like that. For TFT, early on, we made a decision that we would balance the game as if computers were playing it, because it is not a skill-intensive, like an APM action-intensive game. It's a game about knowledge and team building. And so balancing it makes sense to do that at the most optimal levels of play. Master Yi is really powerful if nobody knows how to dodge and counter stun, right? But as soon as you do, his power level goes down. But again, in Teamfight Tactics, that's not the case, right? Army A versus Army B, there is an output, right? It's essentially an auto battler. And so because that output is so predetermined, we can balance it as if computers were playing the game, assuming they use their resources optimally and have built this army to those specifications. But again, that doesn't mean we nerf it just because it's doing well in low elo. It's more like, hey, if you guys want to get better, here's an opportunity to learn, and here's a way to get better at the game.
Okay, interesting. So in some instances, you can leverage the perception of imbalance as a teaching tool instead.
Exactly, and you're sort of acquiring more knowledge as you play and more things you try. You sort of, hey, I tried this comp with these items and it didn't go very well. Either I did something wrong or something happened. What did I learn? Oh, that champion doesn't use that item well. Great, I'll take that learning into my next game. And even players who have been playing for thousands of games, they may have their lines that they prefer and they feel like they've really learned and mastered. That's the trick, right? That's the depth of the game. That's the discovery that as you're starting to get really engrossed into the game, you're sort of like, oh, wow, there's a lot more here to uncover and master. And for players who really like that level of depth, that's what lets TFT be like this 1,000-hour, 10,000-hour game that you can keep playing and sort of really mastering that skill. As long as the game's accessible, that generally works out.
Yeah, it's super unique because there's so much to learn and abuse, if that's the right term, because just like with roguelikes, you guys leverage juxtaposition gratification to create these exciting rare gameplay moments. There being builds that could drop which would practically break the game if you get the right combo, and this is all well and good in roguelikes as they're single player and becoming overpowered is the goal, but how do you manage to balance having these types of builds to allow for that fun, but also make it so that they can't be abused at the same time?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So part of balance isn't just, hey, Army A versus Army B fights, therefore let's see how they go, right? Part of it is the risks you take within the game to reach that point, right? And so if there's an army that you can only get 1 in 10,000 games and requires the stars to align and everything to go right, that army has to end up being more powerful than an army you can do every game, right? And so part of the balance equation of a game like TFT is taking that relative power and that relative chance of acquisition and making sure that those are equal to the point where players look at these armies and go, yeah, that person just got something way rarer than I did, and that makes sense because they took a risk or they tried something pretty interesting. And there's enough combinations and variables within TFT that there's a lot of those outcomes, right? One of the things that's important in these type of games is that there aren't just like 1 or 2 of these high roll moments, but there's actually like, 50, 100, 200. But where TFT is at its best is when, no, there's actually a bunch of potential paths I could go. and I need to react to my augments later, or the other items I get later, or what champions I hit, and you start to figure out where you might be going based on the resources you've been given that particular game. The thing that keeps me interested in both playing it and working on it is just the fact that it's a game that you can sit down and every time you play it, what happens is very different, right? I think a lot of roguelike games, for example, sort of promise that, but actually after about, 50 hours or so, you're like, yeah, I've kind of seen it, I get it. But with TFT, there really are so many combinations. And then by the time you finally start to feel like, okay, maybe I have started to see a lot of it, new set.
Huh? Oh yeah, she doesn't know. Well, even with the absurd amount of content this game has and cycles through, the team completely changed the game with a whole new set of champions, traits and augments, which happens, every 4 months? Which is just insane. How do you guys manage to do that? To add so much new content, balance it all and not allow randomness to create these brutally under or overpowered games? Because I am honestly in awe.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is sort of the options, right? A lot of this comes down to, what I call randomness distribution systems. It's like figuring out, what are the types of experiences we want players to have? How often should they happen, right? I've done a lot of talks on this topic and a lot in this space, but a lot of game designers, for their instinct is like, hey, I want to have a random thing. Their first instinct is to let random do its thing. But the reality is, what you have to do is, hey, I have random, and I want to create experiences between the min and the max. And then I want to make sure that all those potential random factors all land within that min and that max. And if they don't, design a system that makes that true. In Mario Party, you notice how you've watched and you never roll a dice 4 times in the same time in a row? It's because it's not actually random. It's because Nintendo's gone in and made a table of controlled outputs that make sure you never actually roll the same number 4 times in a row, because that's a terrible experience.
Yeah, it's like a form of manufactured ludonarrative. In any game, we want to craft these experiences and have them be randomly distributed, but not to the point where it wouldn't be fun or engaging. You want to experience those extremes, but on the extreme positive side rather than the negative. For example, with getting the augment that makes Shen absolute filth, you want them to get it, but also be rare so not to dominate the meta or feel bad to go against.
Correct. Using your example with the Shen augment, I want you to imagine if you took that Shen augment and then played a game where literally 0 Shens appeared, right? That would be a terrible experience. And so it's up to us to go, okay, we need to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, do we want you to have a game where maybe you take the Shen augment and you can't quite 3-star it? Yeah, that's fine, that's within variance, but literally 0? No. So we should probably build a system to make sure that that just doesn't happen, right? Because that's not an experience I ever want you to have.
Yeah, it would be like winning the lottery, but then the only thing you can spend it on is more lottery tickets that never pay out. It might be skewing with the true randomness, but players won't complain about that. Well, at least they shouldn't be.
Exactly, and it might be statistically unlikely, but in a game with millions of players being played millions of times a day, someone is going to have that experience. And even something as simple as like a 1 in 10,000, at a bigger scale, that's going to happen to thousands of players. So generally, frustration definitely needs to be taken into account because, again, it's part of the play experience. Speaking in terms of pure balance, no, you really shouldn't, right? Like, if something is frustrating, it is balanced, it is what it is, but that doesn't mean just leave it alone. What it means is your design is incorrect and you need to learn from that and adjust that frustration is a factor.
Yeah. Balance is this amorphous blob that devs just keep prodding in hopes that the players will like looking at it, but regardless, someone will always complain about what hat it's wearing. It's maddening.
The reality is also that when you talk about balance, because perception is such a big thing, it's interesting. If you go look at any game community, there's a lot of people that will say there are no balanced video games out there, right? Some players will put that pedestal so high that it's almost unachievable. What's important is you set up a foundation for how you expect your game to play out. So for example, in Teamfight Tactics, we want rounds to last between 18 and 25 seconds. And that's how a normal fight should play out. And then use those anchor points to balance your game to that goal state. As long as you're doing that and generally following that guideline, you will get your game to a really good spot. There will always be dissenters that will tell you you're doing it wrong and the game's not balanced, but just stick to the path, make the game towards that goal that you've sought out to, and I think you'll end up in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, have a balanced mission statement and then stick to your guns, but I honestly don't envy you and your team. Not only is balance such a difficult balance, it's an ever-shifting form to not just adjust around data, but player perception, frustration, and their play experience. Prodding that blob is difficult at the best of times, but yours is wearing 7 different hats and spinning at Mark 10. But honestly, that's why TFT is so fun. Honestly, thank you so much for joining us in the Design Minds today, Mort. It's been a pleasure to peer into the balance process for such a complex game, but here's the question: what do you think? What do you think makes balancing games so difficult, and have you ever experienced balance perception misconceptions that you've eventually learnt from rather than just complaining about? Let us know down below, because we would love to discuss this with you. Well, that was insightful. Big shout out to Mortdog and Kenobi for their wonderful insights into TFT. Oh, yeah, so if you enjoy these types of dev interview style episodes, why not watch them live on my new podcast, DevHeads, which debuts, today. So check that shout out live here on Second Wind, and we'll see you in the chat. Alright, say goodbye, Ludo. Alright, bye guys.
This video is sponsored by Let Bygones Be Bygones, the new atmospheric future noir thriller available now. Channel your inner Blade Runner and solve one last case in this stylish, choice-driven RPG. Create a unique story as you forge your own path through the dystopian city planet Terra Hive. Will you use logic to deduce the facts? Connect with people on an emotional level, or just pull out your gun and cause a bit of chaos. There are no wrong choices here, only the consequences of your actions. Just like that time you watched Finding Nemo and decided that it would be a great idea to put a saltwater fish tank in your studio apartment. Now you're not getting your deposit or that axolotl back. Let Bygones Be Bygones is out now, so head on over to the Steam page to start your adventure today.
Now here's a little tidbit. Do you need to be good at a game to be able to balance it? Mort is one of the best players in the world, as well as being the director, so is a special case to be able to balance the game, but it's common for game devs to be absolutely terrible at playing the games they actually make. But then again, there's a distinction between understanding how to perform an action and actually doing so. So does it really matter? Oh god, this probably should have been a topic in its own right. Well, I can't change it now, Ludo, we're in the bloody credits. Okay, whatever. But it is satisfying to see these patrons go by though, isn't it, Lutz? What a bunch of legends. And if you're still watching, why not consider joining them to help support this weird ass content? Oh, end of the video. Bye!